The basement reeked of mildew and malevolence. Darkness pressed in from every corner, wrapping the crumbling space in a suffocating silence. Sarah Jenkins sat tied to a splintered chair, sweat trailing down her temple, blood at the corner of her mouth, but her eyes, dark and calm, remained unshaken. The four men before her, their bodies littered with hateful ink, swastikas, slogans, skulls, paced like wolves around a kill. "You thought you could come into our town and sniff around without consequence?" growled Jack's rotor, Riley, the ringleader, his bull-like frame looming. The swastika on his neck pulsed with each breath of rage. To his left, Cody read, Miller tossed a baseball bat between his hands. Trent Skull Larson leaned in, reeking of whiskey. And Bo Baum Lind, the mountain of flesh, stood silent but menacing. Sarah didn't flinch. "You made a mistake," she said quietly, her voice steady as steel. They laughed, but Sarah Jenkins wasn't a tourist or a lost woman. She was Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Jenkins, an elite special recon officer working undercover. This mission, tracking the white supremacist militia called the 13 Flags, had led her straight into the belly of the beast. 2 days earlier, she'd pulled into a decaying gas station on the edge of Harmony Creek, an isolated town where time and tolerance had both stood still. Her disguise, a solitary ex-military woman wandering through the South. Her goal, to be seen, to be hunted. It worked. They marked her windshield with their symbol, a 13-striped flag drawn in chalk. They'd taken the bait. Now here she sat, wrists bound, ribs bruised, but mind razor-sharp. She counted every footstep, every sneer, every twitch. They were amateurs, dangerous, yes, but arrogant. That was their weakness. "You alone, lady," Trent hissed, gripping the bat. "Ain't nobody coming." Sarah smiled faintly. "You sure about that?" A second passed. Then toot the ropes dropped. The chair scraped. The room exploded. Her fist cracked into Cody's jaw. He crumpled instantly. Trent swung the bat. She ducked, drove a knee into his gut, twisted and threw him into a pile of crates. Bo charged with a roar. Sarah sidestepped, hooked his arm, and snapped it with a brutal pop. Jax lunged, swinging wildly. She blocked, twisted the bat from his grip, and slammed him into the wall. 0.40 seconds, 0.4 bodies, 0.1 woman, standing. Sarah's breath came heavy, but her posture never faltered. She looked down at Jax, groaning on the floor, and whispered, "You picked the wrong woman." Upstairs, the sound of boots striking hardwood erupted. Flashlights sliced the dark. Commands thundered, "Go! Go!" Basement clear. Captain Miller appeared, rifle raised. "You okay, ma'am?" Sarah gave a small nod. "They're all yours now." Officers poured in. Upstairs, 2 victims were rescued, gagged, bruised, but alive. Crates of weapons were uncovered. Maps with red-marked towns. A hit list, evidence that would dismantle the 13 Flags. Jax groaned, dragging himself toward the stairs. Sarah walked over and crouched beside him. "You thought I was alone," she said softly to spat blood. "You tricked us." "No," she said. "You never looked past your hate." Outside, sirens howled. Red and blue lights danced against peeling walls. Reporters began to arrive. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, their silence heavy with history. But far from Harmony Creek, in a windowless room with walls lined in flags and old war photos, a man watched a flickering screen. His face remained still, his eyes unreadable. On the monitor, Sarah, walking past cameras with blood on her face and purpose in her stride. He reached for an old rotary phone and dialed. "She made her move," he said into the receiver at a pause. "Then it's time we make ours," came the voice on the other. "Indeed. In a nearby room, others stirred, faces hidden behind masks, assembling gear with clinical precision. One adjusted a black vest with Project Resurrection stenciled on the back. Another placed a box labeled Silent Fire into a duffel bag. A girl, no older than 15, loaded a magazine with trembling fingers. The man hung up, then lit a match and dropped it into a steel barrel filled with photographs, Sarah's face among them. They curled, blackened, burned. Sarah stepped into the cold night, her breath fogging in front of her. Across the street stood the white church that once closed its doors to her, when she was 12, claiming she wasn't welcome because of her skin color. Now, she walked past it tall and unshaken, her figure outlined in police lights. This wasn't just about arrests. It was about finally breaking a silence that had lasted for generations. 2 days later, the courthouse pulsed with emotion. Inside, the first hearing of the 13 flags drew journalists, activists, veterans, and citizens who had once stayed silent. Sarah didn't sit among them. She watched through the tinted windows, arms crossed, her black suit absorbing the light. Jax Riley and his group looked insignificant now. Men who had once thought they ruled from the shadows, now exposed in public shame. The evidence was horrifying. Hand-drawn maps with black churches marked as targets, lists of paid-off officers, and names of black veterans selected for elimination. Sarah had ignited this fire so that truth would no longer be buried beneath fear. Her mission had always been personal. At the T-16, she lost her older brother, Corin Jenkins, an Iraq War veteran who came home only to be treated as an outsider. One night, he disappeared walking home. The police called a robbery, but Sarah found the mark, the 13 crooked stripes chalked on the sidewalk. No one investigated. Not the sheriff, not the judge, not the state. So she built her own justice. Sarah joined the police academy and rose through the ranks, becoming one of the country's most skilled undercover agents. She trained to infiltrate hate groups, to move in silence, to strike only when the web was fully exposed. After the rescue operation, Sarah was summoned to speak before a Senate hearing. Millions watched her as she recounted every detail. The months she spent undercover, the moment she was captured, the pain she endured, and the strength she summoned to fight back. The world listened. Some praised her. Others doubted. But Sarah didn't argue. Her silence was her answer. Her actions, her proof. Days later, she returned to the church where her childhood innocence had been shattered. The wooden sign outside now read, "All are welcome. All colors. All faiths." She didn't fully believe it, but she walked in anyway. Mayor Harlan Davis sat alone in the front pew. Years ago, he refused to name a park after her brother. Now, he stood as she approached. "I was wrong," he said softly. "We were wrong." Sarah looked him straight in the eyes. "Then do better." Weeks passed. Sarah visited a fourth-grade classroom in the neighborhood she once called home. The children stared at her wide-eyed, as if she were a superhero. One girl raised her hand. "Did it hurt?" she asked quietly. "When they tied you up?" Sarah knelt beside her. "Yes, it hurt," she replied. "But I knew who I was. That's what saved me." Another boy asked, "Were you scared?" She nodded. "I was. But fear doesn't mean you're weak. It means you care enough to fight." The teacher recorded their exchange, and, as Sarah turned to the camera, she spoke to everyone watching. "To anyone who feels like no one sees you, who feels forgotten, you are not invisible. You are never alone. The pain you carry is strength. Let it grow. Let it shape you." She paused, her gaze steady. "This fight isn't just mine. It belongs to every person told they don't belong. Every soldier dismissed. Every child overlooked. We matter. Our stories matter. Your voice is your power. Don't let anyone silence it." In the months that followed, Sarah's story echoed across the country. Community groups organized town halls to address long-ignored racism. Black veterans came forward with stories of abuse and injustice, inspired by her courage. Civil rights organizations invited her to speak. Her face appeared on magazine covers, not as a celebrity, but as a symbol of grit, loss, and triumph. But Sarah never sought fame. She gave every speech, every interview, not for recognition, but to honor the legacy of her brother and others who were never given the chance to speak. In Harmony Creek, the same church that rejected her slowly transformed. Services opened with prayers in multiple languages. Youth groups started mentorship programs. Sarah knew the change wasn't perfect or fast, but it had begun, and that mattered. One evening, Sarah received a letter in the mail. It wasn't signed. Inside was a photograph of her and Corin from the day he left for Iraq. On the back, in messy handwriting, were 5 words: "He knew you'd finish it." She held the photo close, tears finally escaping the eyes that had stayed dry for so long. Corin had been her reason, her anchor. Now, she was becoming someone else's. Standing at his grave that night, Sarah whispered, "I kept my promise." A breeze passed through the trees, almost like a response. And for the first time in years, Sarah let herself breathe. Her fight was far from over, but she wasn't fighting alone anymore.